I was looking forward to the hiking trip more than I had for any other in recent memory. There's something about the fall season that makes the outdoors irresistible. The crisp air, the vibrant colors of the leaves, and the way the world seems to slow down as it prepares for winter. I had planned this trip for weeks, choosing a remote trail known for its stunning fall foliage and peaceful solitude. It was exactly what I needed to escape the hustle of everyday life. The trailhead was a short drive from town, along a narrow road winding through dense woods. I parked my car at the trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and set off, eager to immerse myself in the beauty of the forest. The sun was shining brightly, and the leaves rustled gently in the breeze, creating a soothing backdrop to my hike. The first part of the trail was a gradual ascent through a forest of tall, sturdy trees. The ground was covered in a carpet of fallen leaves, crunching softly under my boots with every step. I took my time, enjoying the serenity of the woods and snapping a few photos of the breathtaking scenery. The trail was well marked, with signs and blazes guiding the way, and I followed them confidently, knowing I had plenty of time to reach my destination before sunset. As I continued on, the trail began to narrow, winding more sharply through the trees. The vibrant colors of the foliage created a picturesque tunnel of reds, oranges, and yellows, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the forest grew darker, the shadows lengthening and merging into a tangled web of darkness. About halfway through my hike, I noticed something odd. The trail markers, which had been frequent and clear, started to become sparse. I kept walking, assuming it was just a part of the trail's natural variation. But as the trail continued to wind and twist, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees growing denser and the shadows darker. I stopped to consult my map, which showed the trail continuing through a section marked as particularly scenic. According to the map, I was on the right track, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The markers were almost non-existent now, and the few I did see were old and faded, barely visible against the darkening woods. Determined not to let my anxiety get the better of me, I pressed on. I tried to stay focused on the path, but the sense of being watched grew stronger with each step. The forest was eerily quiet now. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent. The only noise was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a twig breaking in the distance. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. There, partially obscured by fallen leaves and underbrush, was an old, weathered sign. The wood was rotting, the paint peeling away, and it was barely legible. It read, "Return to main trail." I stared at the sign in confusion. I had been following the main trail, hadn't I? I was certain I hadn't strayed from the marked path. A sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves around me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. My gut told me to turn back, but I couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. What was beyond this point? Why had the trail changed so abruptly? I decided to keep going, hoping that the main trail would reappear soon. The forest grew darker as the sun began to set, the shadows deepening and merging into an almost impenetrable darkness. I fumbled with my flashlight, turning it on and adjusting the beam to pierce through the gloom. The light cast long, flickering shadows on the trees, creating a disorienting effect. The hours seemed to pass as I trudged through the increasingly dense forest. The trail markers had vanished entirely, and I was relying solely on the map and my flashlight to guide me. My sense of unease grew with every step. The forest was now silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the woods were closing in on me. Eventually, I came to a clearing, and my heart sank when I saw that it was empty, save for a small, crude wooden structure in the center. It looked like a tiny, dilapidated shack, its walls sagging and its roof partially caved in. The sight of it sent a wave of dread through me. Why would there be a structure like this in the middle of the forest? I approached cautiously, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls of the shack. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swayed in the breeze. I hesitated before pushing it open, my flashlight beam illuminating the interior. The shack was empty, save for a few pieces of rotting furniture and a dusty, cobweb-covered shelf. I stepped inside, trying to calm my racing heart. The air inside was stale, and the smell of mildew and decay was overpowering. I noticed something odd on the floor, a tattered journal lying partially hidden under a pile of debris. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and flipped through the pages. The journal was filled with disjointed, frantic writing, recounting a man's growing paranoia and fear of being lost in the woods. As I read, I realized with a sinking feeling that the entries described the same experience I was having: the disappearing trail, the sense of being watched, and the unsettling feeling that the forest itself was conspiring against me. The final entry was hastily scrawled and unfinished. "They're coming. I don't know how much longer I can." The sound of a twig snapping outside the shack jolted me back to reality. My heart pounded as I quickly stuffed the journal into my backpack and turned off my flashlight. I listened intently, trying to discern the source of the noise. It sounded like someone or something was moving around outside. I peeked through a crack in the wall, but the dense darkness beyond the shack made it impossible to see anything. The noises grew louder, more distinct, and I could hear the rustling of leaves and the faint sound of footsteps. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to find my way back. I grabbed my flashlight and headed back to the clearing, my mind racing with fear. The shadows seemed to move and shift as I made my way through the forest, and the oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the eerie sounds of movement just out of sight. My sense of direction was completely lost, and every step felt like it was leading me further into the unknown. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance and felt a surge of hope. I pushed through the underbrush, stumbling toward the light, and emerged onto a well-trodden path. My heart leapt with relief as I recognized the familiar trail markers. I followed the path with renewed determination, my flashlight casting a reassuring beam of light in the darkness. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually, I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. I collapsed into the driver's seat, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I started the engine and drove away, the forest receding into the distance behind me. The experience left me shaken and unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, guiding me off the path, and I couldn't explain the strange occurrences I'd witnessed. Since then, I've avoided that trail, and whenever the fall season rolls around, I find myself haunted by the memory of that night. The woods hold a mystery that I don't think I'll ever fully understand. The sense of being lost, the strange signs, and the journal's frantic entries all point to something dark and unsettling lurking just beyond the trees. I hope I never have to face it again. When I received the invitation to a dinner party hosted at an unfamiliar estate, it struck me as peculiar. The invitation itself was a work of art, elaborately designed with ornate calligraphy and a sense of formality that suggested an event of great importance. The address was for a remote historic manor I had never heard of before, and the RSVP requested that guests arrive promptly at 7 p.m., emphasizing that the evening would be a unique experience. My curiosity, coupled with a penchant for intriguing social gatherings, nudged me to accept the invitation. The promise of a unique experience was too tempting to ignore, despite the unsettling tone of the invitation. The estate was described as an elegant historic manor known for its exclusivity, and I assumed it would be a memorable evening. On the night of the party, I drove to the manor, which was located on the edge of town. As I approached, the estate loomed ominously in the twilight. The long driveway was lined with ancient trees, their gnarled branches casting long shadows over the cobblestone path. The mansion itself was a Gothic structure with high spires and intricate stonework that seemed to reach for the darkening sky. The grandeur of the place was undeniable, but there was an unsettling aura that made me uneasy. The front door was opened by a butler who greeted me with a practiced smile and ushered me inside. The foyer was equally imposing, with a marble floor and a massive chandelier that flickered dimly. The air was filled with the faint scent of old wood and polished furniture. I was soon joined by other guests, all dressed in formal attire. We exchanged polite but reserved pleasantries, each of us clearly trying to gauge the nature of the evening's events. While we mingled, the butler offered drinks and hors d'oeuvres. The food was impeccably presented, but the atmosphere was heavy with an air of uncertainty. The guests, despite their refined manners, seemed just as apprehensive as I was. Eventually, we were led to the dining room. The space was grand, with a long polished table set with fine china and silverware. Candles flickered along the length of the table, casting eerie shadows on the walls and creating an almost theatrical ambience. A floral centerpiece adorned the table, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the otherwise somber setting. As we took our seats, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the room. The host of the evening had not yet made an appearance, and the silence was almost oppressive. The butler reappeared, carrying a large covered dish with a ceremonious flourish. He placed the dish at the center of the table and then withdrew to the periphery of the room. The moment felt charged with unspoken tension. I glanced around at the other guests, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. We exchanged glances, each of us silently questioning what the evening would bring. When the cover was finally lifted from the dish, I was taken aback. Inside was a beautifully arranged assortment of what appeared to be exquisite gourmet food. Roasted meats, vegetables, and rich sauces. Yet, as I studied the dish more closely, something seemed off. The meats were presented in an elaborate and unsettling manner, their presentation more grotesque than appetizing. Before I could react, the lights dimmed further, and a soft, eerie melody began to play from hidden speakers. The atmosphere grew more surreal as the room was bathed in a flickering, unsettling light. The guests began to serve themselves, their movements mechanical and tense. As I took a serving of the strange dish, a sense of unease washed over me. The food, though rich and flavorful, had an odd texture and a taste that I found difficult to place. I glanced around at the other guests, who seemed to be experiencing the same discomfort. The dinner progressed in a disorienting manner. The conversations grew more strained, and the atmosphere seemed to thicken with an unspoken dread. Occasionally, the butler would reappear, his expression inscrutable as he refilled glasses and attended to the table. His presence added to the eerie ambience, as if he were a silent observer to the unfolding events. As the evening wore on, the lights flickered more erratically, and the soft melody became increasingly discordant. The guests' behavior became more erratic, their laughter and conversation taking on a forced, unsettling quality. The tension in the room mounted, creating an oppressive sense of dread. When the dessert was finally served, it was an elaborate confection that seemed almost too perfect. The guests' reactions ranged from hesitant to fascinated as they sampled the delicate yet strangely unappetizing treat. My own discomfort grew, and I began to feel as though I were trapped in a surreal nightmare. By the time the evening drew to a close, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The host had not appeared throughout the evening, and the absence of any explanation for the strange events only heightened my unease. I decided to leave, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. As I made my way to the exit, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The grand foyer now seemed darker, more foreboding than when I arrived. The butler, who had been so attentive earlier, now stood silently by the door, his expression as unreadable as ever. I left the estate with a sense of profound disquiet. The experience of the evening's strange food, eerie music, and the unsettling behavior of the other guests left me with a lingering sense of unease. The manor's grandeur and the promise of a unique experience had been overshadowed by a feeling of discomfort and dread. The memory of the dinner party haunted me long after that night. I often wondered what lay behind the facade of the manor and whether the evening had been a carefully orchestrated event or something far more sinister. The estate remains an enigma, and the dinner party remains a chilling reminder of the unsettling and inexplicable. The town mall had always been a bustling center of activity. Shops, food courts, and bright lights filled the space from morning till evening. However, as the years went by, it fell into decline. Stores closed one by one, and foot traffic dwindled until it became an almost ghostly remnant of its former self. By the time I decided to visit one evening, it had been officially shut down for months, with no trespassing signs plastered across every entrance. Still, curiosity got the better of me. The idea of exploring the abandoned mall intrigued me. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I knew I had to act fast before the cold drove me indoors. I'd heard rumors from locals about strange occurrences in the area, but I was skeptical. I packed a flashlight and a camera, figuring it would be an interesting adventure. I approached the mall from the side, where the old service entrance was slightly ajar. With a bit of effort, I managed to wedge it open just enough to slip through. Inside, the mall was eerily quiet, save for the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof and the distant sound of wind howling through broken windows. The once vibrant hallways were now draped in dust and neglect, with faded advertisements clinging to the walls. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I walked through the main concourse. The once bustling food court was now a desolate expanse of empty tables and overturned chairs. Broken glass crunched beneath my feet as I moved carefully, not wanting to disturb too much. The remnants of old food stands and menus were scattered around, adding to the sense of abandonment. As I ventured further, I noticed how the mall seemed to change. The more I explored, the more the place felt alive in a disquieting way. It was as if the empty corridors were whispering secrets, and the darkness seemed to pulse with an unseen presence. I felt a growing sense of unease, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. I came across the old department store, its once bright signage now hanging askew. The entrance was barricaded, but a side door was slightly ajar, allowing me to slip inside. The store was even more unsettling than the rest of the mall. Shelves were left in disarray, and mannequins stood frozen in eerie poses, their vacant eyes staring into nothingness. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. As I moved deeper into the store, I found a back room that appeared to have been used as an office or storage space. Old files and paperwork were scattered across the floor, and the walls were lined with dusty, forgotten items. On a desk, I discovered an old notebook. Curious, I flipped through it and found it filled with detailed accounts of inventory and financial records. However, as I continued, the notes grew more erratic. The last entries were disturbing, describing strange noises and sightings, written in a hurried and shaky hand. Phrases like shadows moving on their own and voices in the dark filled the pages. The final entry was a frantic scrawl. "They are here. I hear them. I need to get out." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the mall. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. I heard a faint noise behind me, like a distant whisper or the shuffling of feet. I turned quickly but saw nothing. Deciding it was best to leave, I made my way back to the main concourse. The feeling of dread was overwhelming now, and every creak and groan of the building seemed amplified in the silence. The once familiar space felt foreign and menacing. The dark corners seemed to move, and the shadows danced in the periphery of my vision. As I reached the main entrance, I noticed something strange. The door I had used to enter was now completely shut and locked. Panic set in. I tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. My flashlight flickered, and I was left in near darkness. The sense of claustrophobia and fear mounted as I realized I was trapped inside. I tried to retrace my steps to find another exit, but the mall seemed to twist and change around me. The familiar hallways now appeared as endless, disorienting corridors. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but more of the same empty stores and broken fixtures. As time passed, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. The whispers and noises that had been distant were now closer, more distinct. I heard footsteps echoing my own, but when I turned, there was no one there. The once quiet mall seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy. Eventually, I stumbled upon a service exit. The door was heavy, but with all my strength, I managed to push it open. I stepped outside into the cold night air, gasping for breath. I looked back at the mall, its dark, hulking presence looming against the night sky. The sense of relief was tinged with a lingering fear of what I had experienced inside. As I walked away from the mall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lingering in the shadows of that abandoned place. The once familiar mall had become a haunting reminder of how isolation and neglect can twist the ordinary into something profoundly unsettling. I've never returned to that mall, and I've avoided the area since. The memory of that night, the eerie silence, the disturbing journal entries, and the feeling of being trapped has left a lasting impression. The mall remains a dark and unsettling chapter in my life, a place where reality and nightmare seemed to blend, and where the ordinary became profoundly eerie. The desolate mall now stands as a haunting reminder of the unknown and the unsettling. It serves as a cautionary tale of how places abandoned and forgotten can take on a life of their own, becoming a vessel for fear and mystery long after the lights have gone out and the crowds have dispersed.